everybody. Welcome to another episode of Indie Game Dev Report, a podcast where we talk to all sorts of indie folk. And today, on this 10th episode, I've interviewed an aspiring narrative designer who's been quite enthusiastic about the show. Soon we'll be learning a ton here, but first I'd like to very quickly talk about a few things. So first off, in the news, I saw this coming, but couldn't speak about it until it actually occurred. So last episode, I said that Apple was threatening to revoke licenses from Unreal devs, but the court has granted a certain level of protection from these threats, which is great news for indies. Fortnite, which I still have not played even once, is still getting the Apple treatment. So I'm sure there will be more to come on this, and podcasts aren't the greatest for time-sensitive information, so this type of news is not really my focus. Of course, when there is big AAA news that's so big that it affects indies, then I feel like I need to at least bring it up, even if there are better sources to get this info from in a more time-sensitive manner. So go look into that elsewhere if you want to. Other big news is that Unity is opened up its shares to the public. So we don't quite know exactly what this means yet, or what this will mean. Only the future will tell, but I'm fairly certain that this is going to be bad news for indies. Personally, I'm a little worried that some evil conglomerate like Tencent or Apple will buy up half the shares and make life hell for Unity devs. I can tend to side with skepticism when it comes to big companies throwing cash around. I'm a little scared as a Unity dev, honestly, but thankfully Unity and Unreal are not our only options, and maybe we'll see Godot take it up a notch. Who knows? I really hope that things stay good for Unity, but it's hard to imagine that working out that way in the long term. So we'll just have to keep moving with the flow. We'll just have to keep our ear to the ground and see what happens as it happens. Next up, real quick discussion on what it means to be indie these days. I saw some huff about this on Twitter, so I thought I'd just bring it up real quick. I guess people are expecting some type of static definition. Well, I've got news for you. Unfortunately, in today's world, definitions change all the time, and there is nothing that we can do about it. All we can do is go with the flow. Here's a perfect example, the word retro. What do you think the word retro means? Of course, today people say retro when they're talking about classic gaming. But the definition is actually the opposite, believe it or not. If you look it up in the dictionary, you'll see that it's when new things are made to appear or feel to seem old. So the game I'm working on, right? So an indie game with pixel art is actually a retro game, and Pac-Man is not. But try explaining this to a retro collector group, you're just going to get grief, because the definition has changed. Retro now means classic games. There's nothing we can do about that. So yes, Fall Guys is an indie game from a quite large indie studio. There are clearly varying sizes of indie studios. Does a publisher make a difference on whether your studio is indie or not? Of course not. And of course people are going to have some conjecture on this. Indies have partners all the time though. Take id Software for example. They were partnered with Apogee really early in the studio's lifetime, before Doom. But Doom was still an indie title. Id was an indie studio for a long time, and then eventually, they got bigger. Things changed. But at one point it was indie, and Apogee as well was an indie publisher. So going through a publisher doesn't make a difference. A lot of these publishers are indies as well. A lot of times when an indie publisher forms these days, it's because they did well as a developer. Okay, so moving on, contractors, that doesn't make a difference either. Tons of indies with small budget contract devs. That like, even a smaller budget than I have for my game, they will contract devs. So what actually does make you an indie? It's literally up to the zeitgeist. You have no control over how people use a term. Marketers that are backed by millions of dollars will use the word indie. The people who are using the new definition are primarily non-devs that are just flocking from whatever else everyone else is flocking to. That's what they're flocking towards. So everyone who's upset about Fall Guys' success or claims of being indie, I totally get it. Don't get me wrong. I have not played it yet, but in my opinion, the game looks terrifyingly uninnovative. It seems like a ripoff of a show that I used to watch on TV over a decade ago. The art style looks like Candy Crush, but in 3D. I hear the player controller is janky, so that it hides the bad netcode, and essentially loses you the match. The servers are, or at least were, apparently super easy to hack, but clearly the resources are all being spent on PR and marketing. The game to me looks bad, plays bad, has server issues, but a crazy amount of money, and one of the biggest indie publishers behind it. So it's frustrating to see this game do so well and claim the indie status, just to confuse the players with a marketing strategy that makes it so those players no longer look at solo devs as an indie. It's pretty bad. I mean, to call themselves indie at that point it's a marketing scheme. That's what it is. But technically, the definition allows for it. So you, as a consumer or as a developer, are going to have to make the choice for yourself. What indie means to you, how you're going to present yourself as a business, all of that good stuff. But the reality is that we're not all that independent after all. Most of us aren't even making our own engines, most of us aren't making all of our own assets, and nearly every single one of us has had some type of help from external testers. Without the help of a community, just about any game is dead in the water. Can you make a game without getting any help? Sure. Would I recommend it? Absolutely not. Get the help you need to make the thing that you want to make. Don't worry about what constitutes as indie, since the definition is subject to change. The best thing you can do to differentiate your studio is to be clear about the 3 design pillars of your studio. Now, if you're unfamiliar, design pillars are super important, so if you're unfamiliar, you might want to go learn about this. For example, the design pillars of my studio are sustainability, to provide inspiration to the community to create games, and ethical profit. So those are 3 things: sustainability, providing inspiration, and ethical profit. These things are a work in progress, and they might change with my studio as it grows. In fact, I'm positive that things will change. But if you take a look at anything that my studio is producing right now, it all aligns with those core concepts. Work this idea into your branding, not my pillars, but the idea of making pillars. Make that your branding. Get it into any copy on social media should have that same type of design pillar strategy. And what we can do as indies is be transparent, where larger corporations can no longer do that. That's going to be our best way of standing out, is to just do the things that we do naturally that larger corporations can no longer do because they're too large. It's important to remember what indies do better than big companies. When an indie game has 1.3 million Twitter followers, how many do you think they can personally thank for playing that? Let me repeat that. When an indie game like Fall Guys has 1.3 million Twitter followers, an indie game with 1.3 million Twitter followers, how many do you think that they are going to personally thank for playing their game? And then ask yourself, how many people have you personally thanked for playing your game? So, does this answer the laughable question of what is indie? No way. Absolutely not. I don't have any control of the zeitgeist. No one does. But I did offer other ways of thinking about it, and I think that is ultimately more important. If you don't believe me, seriously, go look up the definition of retro and try to use that word around a bunch of nerds, right? You will get an earful about what is retro and what is not. And it's always changing. This is what's happening to the word indie. I hope any confusion is eased. Sorry for the rants. Very quickly, also, I'd like to congratulate Matt Tendo and Boss Battle Games with their successful Kickstarter. I mentioned their board game called Boss Battle a while back, and it looks like the Kickstarter just ended with 384 backers pledging $32,569, which is amazing. So that's awesome. I recently caught a couple live streams of the team playing the game, and it looks fantastic. It also looks like it's fun to play on Tabletop Simulator. Another tangent here on Tabletop Simulator. I recently got a few friends to grab it. If you haven't played Tabletop Simulator, it's an awesome way to play some of the more complex tabletop games. Like you can do D&D on it. You could play, simple games like poker or chess, marbles, Chinese checkers. That type of stuff is all in there. But there's also tons of other indie board games and stuff like that you can download. There's a bunch of communities on Discord and stuff like that. There's a ton of content out there, and it's really, really easy to play. Now, I'm a really big fan of Roll20.net. You might have heard of that. It's like a free website, and it's great for playing mostly D&D and tabletop games. But Tabletop Simulator, while it's at a premium price, it literally blows Roll20 out of the water, especially in terms of making your own prototype. It also works in VR for some devices, and it's frequently on sale. So, I just can't say enough good things about Tabletop Simulator. And in COVID times right now, it's an amazing testing tool for tabletop game designers. And I'm currently using it to test a card game I've been designing on the back burner for over a year now. It's been a ton of fun. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if you own Tabletop Simulator and want to get in on that testing of my sci-fi card game. I can tell you all about it if you reach out to me. Okay, sorry for all of that lengthy intro segment stuff. Without further ado, here's my interview with Jackson, an aspiring narrative designer. Now, I want to apologize for how long this episode took to get out, and also for the fact that at points the quality of the reception of the call drops pretty low. And I did my best to edit things and make it understandable, but I definitely appreciate your patience in those parts of the interview. Awesome interview lined up. I've got Jackson, a aspiring narrative designer who has taken a course and is willing to teach us a little bit about what they've learned in narrative design.
I think you got it perfectly.
Okay. So how about this course that you've taken? Can you describe that a little bit?
So the person that is running the course, you can find him on Twitter at Digital Chumps. His name is Nathan Stevens, and he is a professional video game reviewer. And he's been teaching me in the course on how to use this. And he's been using mediums such as comic books and movies. And what actually the biggest and most surprising thing I've learned from him is that video games, I know that people make the connection that video games are like movies, but he makes this connection saying that video games are nothing like movies. The key difference is that video games are an interactive medium.
Yeah.
More closely, video games actually relate more closely to choose your own adventure books, some of the first ones, because those were some of the first really truly interactive mediums.
No, I think you're right. I think that's a quite profound thing to say, but absolutely 100% true.
I have a couple talking points here.
Sure.
I can go through those.
Yeah, you can dig right in.
First thing I would really like to talk about is characters. And this is going to be my main talking point. When creating a character, one of the first things that you really need to do when just coming up with the idea for the character is avoiding stereotypes.
Okay, I could see that.
When you're avoiding stereotypes, you make a more diverse character, and you stray away from people on Reddit completely destroying you for having a not true to a base character. One of the best examples of this is with schizophrenia and Sienna's sacrifice. I've seen people on Reddit, and I've known people who has family who has schizophrenia or friends that has schizophrenia, and it is extremely close to what it actually is. Instead of acting like schizophrenia is this horrible thing that you can't control and it makes you like insane, which is what some mediums go for doing. And Sienna, or I don't really know how to pronounce it, Hellblade, I'm going to call it, does it perfectly. And they're getting a sequel, so I can't wait to see what that's going to be.
What did you say the title was that did it well?
Hellblade.
Hellblade. Okay, yeah, I haven't played that one, but I've heard about it. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and schizophrenia itself is an interesting, dilemma for game developers and for story writing, because it's almost like one of those things that you could see like people just kind of falling into because it's interesting and people don't really know a lot about it, but at the same time you have to do its own justice. I guess you have to look up what you're gonna be writing about. So I think that's important. Yeah.
There's actually tons of different schizophrenia. One of the ones that I was going to use for one of my characters, I forgot the name of it, but what it does is it kind of allows you not to really be able to talk and function correctly. So you would find yourself like repeating same words, or stuttering a lot, and sometimes you just find yourself uncontrollably shaking your hands or tapping your feet.
Okay.
And it is, I was going to use that for one of my characters. And also, there's the most common one actually is auditory and visual hallucinations, but there is some where it just is auditory hallucinations or just visual hallucinations in general.
Sure, like psychosis.
Yes. I've been trying to do research on PTSD for what I'm working on. I'm thinking about maybe turning it into a book instead of a video game narrative.
You broke up there for a second. Did you at the beginning of what you were saying there? You're working on. Did you say ESP?
Book.
Okay, a book. Yeah, and I missed the beginning of what was interesting about the book.
I'm learning and researching about PTSD.
Oh, PTSD. That's what I missed. Okay, that is interesting. I can relate to that entirely.
My grandmother, who I'm actually living with, has PTSD from something very odd. When she was younger, her father was in the Korean War. And so she grew up with this negative image of people from Korea.
Sure.
Fireworks, and he hid in the closet. It is a terrifying thing, and I want to go delve into that in the book.
I see. Now you broke up there at the beginning again, but I think I understood that time. Basically, you're saying that fireworks can be a huge trigger for PTSD, and you wanted to include that in something that you're writing.
Yes.
And just to be clear, these are stereotypes that you are typically supposed to avoid, but you're taking a further look into them, and that makes it okay. Is that what's going on here?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to realize them. So some people can get wrong. I've seen people that do lots of things wrong. I've seen people where during PTSD, someone would see a gun and freak out, and that normally actually does not happen unless the person is holding the gun or using the gun on them.
I see.
My second talking point is going to be character trying to get your player to relate to your character. And one of the best games, I think, of honestly, our generation that does this is The Last of Us.
Okay.
During the game, I know of many people who honestly immediately relate to the character by introducing a daughter figure of just this person who's just going about his life, and then immediately just taking this daughter away from you and figuring out how this affects your character later on.
Okay. Now, I haven't played The Last of Us, neither the first one or the second one, and I really don't know too much about the game. I believe it's zombies or something like that. Am I close?
You need to play it. It's $15 at I think on the PlayStation Store it's $15 right now, and you should play it.
Ah, right on. Well, I will look into it on PC for sure. Well, can you talk a little bit about what The Last of Us did really well?
The Last of Us, what they did really well is making an intriguing story with also making this world that feels alive. And other games that do it well, in my opinion, are Skyrim and The Witcher. Do that perfectly.
No, I totally know Skyrim.
Yes, making every little detail just feel alive. I mean, in The Last of Us, you can walk into a building, or in The Last of Us 2, find a note and be like, oh, okay, so that's why there's a broken window here, or that's why that you can see clear bullet holes.
Sure, yeah.
Everything feels alive in the world.
And that's kind of one of the main jobs of a narrative designer, correct?
Yes. Well, there's actually different types. You can do environmental level design, story design, character design. You can even do so far as character narrative design, just designing the backstory for your characters.
Wow.
There's lots of different ones. Actually, speaking of that, Naughty Dog has set up for their upcoming game trying to do environmental level narrative designer. Mm-hmm. For The Last of Us, it would be stuff like, okay, so this building is crumbled because of like nukes, which they did use in The Last of Us.
Sure. Very cool.
Yes. So next up is deciding the 4 types of major characters. There is others, but I'm not really going to go into that.
Okay.
And so the 4 types of characters are, give me a second, I'm trying to find my note. Okay. Cypher.
Yep.
The fixed character, the customizable character, or a fixed background and customizable character.
Okay. So that was real quick. So you went into 4 different types of characters. You said Cypher was the first one?
Yeah. Was there any that you were interested about that you would like me to go into first?
Yeah. Cypher. I mean, that sounds cool. What's Cypher?
Cypher actually is not as cool as you really think. It's actually the most dull of the character types, and Cypher is pretty much like your Doom Marine or your Call of Duty character.
Okay, so it's kind of like a blank slate.
Yeah. So I mean, you hack and slashes them, but you only care about them because it's a vessel for hacking and slashing. They're not really there to serve any purpose.
So the narrative is kind of put on the player at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, in your head, you can imagine that who your character is, but it's not canon. You can't make that happen.
I mean, I can see where you're coming from as a narrative designer, how you could say how that would be dull. As a counterpoint, I would say that, for different types of games, obviously. But I think that sometimes that might actually help in the immersion, especially for first-person games such as Doom and things like that. But sure,
Yeah.
let's if you want to go into the next type of character.
Yes, that would be the fixed character. The fixed character is ones that you see most prominently in games. I mean, for example, Last of Us, as I was talking about earlier, is a fixed character. Dark Souls. No, not Dark Souls. Fallout is a character
Would
either. A lot of
JRPGs
Naughty Dog games.
like
Yes,
Final
JRPGs.
Fantasies that would fall into that?
Yes, Final Fantasy and Persona 5 both have fixed characters. Bloodborne has a fixed character.
All right, I think that one's kind of self-explanatory then.
Yeah.
Fixed being that it's already written before the player even has anything to do with it.
Yes.
So there might be some branching, but not enough to change the character's arc.
Yeah. Like, I know there's games that what they do is at the end they give you a final choice, but it doesn't really affect your character in the grand scheme of things.
Sure.
And there's actually some games I want to talk about this where you should stick with one character path. If your character's been this horrible person all along, and at the end, for no reason, it's like have a choice to either make your character be a good person or keep him on the path of evil, it wouldn't really make sense because there's no reason to have it.
I see. So you're saying that the choices that the designer presents to the player should
have
based
meaning.
They should be based on previous choices and what kind of what kind of being or whatever the player has chosen for the character. Okay, that makes sense.
All right. The next type of character is, I think, the most self-explanatory, and that is the customizable character.
Okay, yeah, sure. So your Animal Crossing, Sims, that type of stuff, right?
Yeah, World of Warcraft.
Ah, yeah. So your MMORPGs and okay.
Yeah.
And then, so what did you say the next one was?
The final one is like Skyrim, how you were talking about earlier, and stuff like Fallout and most Bethesda games.
Ah, so like the ARPGs or the CRPGs.
Yes, and that is a fixed background with a customizable character. For Fallout 4, you have a customizable character, and the story is that your son was stolen after the bombs dropped. For Skyrim, it was that you escaped from being executionized.
Executed, yeah.
Executed from a dragon just randomly coming by.
Yeah, yeah. Dragon saved you. I mean, you are the Dragonborn after all, right?
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I could see how that would help a lot of people, not just narrative designers or writers, but game designers and anyone who's working in development, even in the character aspect or the concept side. That could help people to take a deeper look into the characters that they're creating. I think that's some really great stuff. Sure.
Little tidbit here is that technically, even though not a playable character, NPCs are still playable. Not playable, but our NPCs are still technically characters, and they should be as full as life as your others. A great example of this is The Witcher, and a not so great example is the terrible mess that was the Call of Cthulhu game. I spent $30 on it, and it was horrible, to say the least.
Was it really that bad?
The characters,
wow.
It was bad. The characters were dull. They reused the same character model for nearly every single male, and the character models look horrendous. They look like dying monkeys, to say the best. The only good character model I saw was a character named Cat. And the only reason it was decent is because it was one of the only females that they actually had to spend time on to make look like a female. And it was the only one that was representative of the time that they were in, which was the 1930s.
Wow.
It was a horrendous game. There was bugs and glitches, but all the characters were dull, and you would talk to them and they would like repeat words or like bug out or just have completely dull backstories, unlike things like The Witcher or even The Last of Us. NPCs that you don't even see are there and you can imagine them, which is a great thing that they do.
Right on. Now, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about Call of Cthulhu. I've heard of it before, and I've listened to other people talk about it actually on other podcasts. But
it is a way.
Is it an indie game? I believe it was kickstarted, right? Or crowdfunded?
I think so.
So it's very different budget than the other games, The Witcher and The Last of Us. But still, they could have maybe worked their budget to help the story.
Indie developers don't necessarily have a time crunch, so it doesn't make sense that they wouldn't put more interest in these characters.
Well, you would be surprised actually how much crunch happens on the indie side of things, and time is always of the essence. You still got to pay your rent, is what it comes down to. And hopefully the Kickstarter helped them with that, but they probably either needed to ask for more money or needed to hire better people, I think. You know, there's always mistakes to be made, and you always learn from your mistakes.
Well, I think that I'm not sure. I think it was Until Dawn was budgeted as an indie game before it got taken up for a larger property.
Okay, and that happens very often. Rocket League, same thing.
Yeah, but I think that people should spend more time not just focusing on the characters. It's great if you have a majorly in-depth character, and sometimes you can get away with having a horrible, horrible world, but the most interesting character that you've ever seen in a video game. But you should balance it out with characters. Another one is A Night in the Woods. It was a fantastic indie game. It was an indie game, and it did a great job of making the characters realized. Hollow Knight did a great job making all the NPCs realized.
Very cool. I haven't played Hollow Knight, but I've seen a lot of it, and I've heard that it was very good amongst all of my platformer friends. And
it's a great game.
A Night in the Woods looks amazing. I mean, both of those look great.
They do, and they are great games. Any other questions you want to ask me?
Sure. I mean, just sticking on those games, could you explain maybe what you think they did really well as indies? Because I think that's really important. Because let's face it, story-driven games are becoming more and more trendy. They're becoming the new big thing. Instead of
back in like the 1990s, it used to be first-person shooters. Then it became JRPGs. And now in 2020, it's story-driven games.
Yeah, the trends are going to keep changing. So what do you think is helping some of these indies to just really find almost like a secret sauce or something that's helping them to stand out? I mean, it's difficult to write.
So the first thing that they really do amazingly right, but not a lot of people can do, is have amazing art to just make it automatically stand out as something different. Both of those games were hand-drawn, which is incredible, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. And just to go back a bit, how did Call of Cthulhu look in comparison? Was the art okay?
It was. The character models were not good, but the world outside of the character models was great. I remember thinking how weird and not very good of a game this was, but then looking at a shelf and then seeing books that were actually popular in 1930s.
Wow, so the environment they spent maybe too much time on, while the characters they really probably should have done first.
Yes.
Interesting. So sometimes it's just the choices that you make that are going to affect what the player's experience is like.
Yes. What else they do well is having not only intriguing characters to back it up, is good mechanics and good gameplay. Like Hollow Knight has really interesting patterns to like see and then use to your advantage, as well as great sword combat. And Night in the Woods has great traversal to get to places that you might not be able to go to. And I think they have some other interesting things, kind of like The Last of Us had hearing. Night in the Woods, something like that's where you can be able to see other like collectibles and maybe items that you missed on your first playthrough.
Ah, that's interesting. That it deals with your senses like that. That's an interesting mechanic. So it sounds like what you're saying is that games with good stories that do well also have all of the other parts too.
Yes, a lot of games that you see that do massively well have things like that. One of the most odd games that I've seen that had somewhat an intriguing story, and you're not going to believe me when I say this. It was a free game on Steam it was a typing game called Space Bear.
Huh.
It had a terrible art style. It looked like it was drawn by like a 3-year-old, but it had somehow an intriguing story and an intriguing character that you could shape the way you want to. And it had like an intriguing reason to like make it a typing game.
Interesting. So it was literally typing?
Yes, the reason why is because, well, you're a bear and bears can't speak English, but your companion does. So you would like mash on the keyboard, but you would start off with like the letter. For example, it was like, can you play some music? You would start off with the letter C and just start mashing the keyboard afterwards. And your companion would be like, oh, okay, that's what you mean when you just growl randomly like that.
Huh. Wow, that sounds very interesting. But you said the story actually plays a huge part?
Yes. You can do things like, I think you can blow up planets if you choose to. I ended up accidentally massacring an entire planet of mole people on accident.
That's very strange for a typing game.
And you can do things like make your companion feel completely worthless and make your AI become sentient, go into a depression. Like I told my companion that under a pile of a blanket was his dead family, and he didn't know that he had family. And I go pushing this, and it was like, "Yeah, that's your dead family. We took it from you when you were born."
Oh, geez. Yeah. Wow. So you said the name of this game was called Space Bear?
Yes, it is interesting to say the least.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I'll have to take a look at that.
It is free on Steam, by the way, so it doesn't cost any money.
No, yeah, that helps for sure.
It does help. Any other questions?
Yeah, you want to go back into your notes a bit about the course?
Actually, yeah, I have some others.
Whatever you want to cover, you can take your time.
Okay, here it is. I found one thing about merits and flaws.
Okay.
All of your characters should always have some defining factor that keeps them from being perfect. For example, I'm going back to The Last of Us again because it is honestly a great game. Ellie has anger issues, and separation issues from her family and her friends, and Joel has issues with trust.
Okay.
After his brother. And now a bad way to do this is, for example, Superman.
All right.
It's kind of it's one of the first real superhumans ever really created. One of the mainstream ones for comics. The only issue is that Superman doesn't really have any flaws. He's a perfect beam. The only issue is that a rare rock that can barely be found on Earth.
Right,
Your
kryptonite.
characters, yes, your characters should not be like Superman and should be realistic, unless you're trying to make something that's not realistic. But even if you're trying to do that, all characters should have a flaw.
I see. Yeah, you got to make things interesting, right?
Like for an upcoming game, I saw Watch Dogs Legion. I was looking at some interviews of that, and I saw one that like really piqued my interest in kind of weirdness as a flaw. They were talking about how each character has some strengths and some flaws, and they went into detail about how some characters that you find have the hiccups, which is so strange, but it makes stealth harder because you're hiccuping.
Yeah, no, I could see how that would work as a stealth, as a mechanic for a stealth game to make it more interesting.
And you can also play as the elderly in the game, which not only makes you slower, but means you can't crouch as long. Because of aching old joints, you can't run either, which I think is an interesting mechanic.
Yeah, no, that is that's as far as stealth games go. You it seems like you almost kind of have to be creative. So I think that those are interesting, good concepts.
So when I was doing a course, one of the things that we had to do for homework was use this kind of list or chart to use as basics for creating a character. And I think it's interesting since nearly every character can fit into this chart in some way, unless it's, I don't know, unless it's like some ancient being we don't know the name of that appears for like 3 seconds in this post-credit secret ending.
Okay, so any real character that's really written fits into this diagram, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And can you describe the diagram at all?
Yeah. Name, title, ethnicity, race, complexion, height, weight, eyes, hair, personality, appearance, motto, short bio, and emotional status.
So those are
an odd one.
Are those columns or rows, and like how is it laid out? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. But nearly all characters have it, and the most interesting one for me that I focus on the most is the final one, which is emotional status. I think about that a lot when trying to make my characters more realistic. As I said, I was doing one where the character had PTSD, and so I had to make like the emotional status distress.
Sure.
I saw one of the examples we used was Solid Snake's clone.
Okay.
A very weird one, but at the end it says for emotional status, dead inside and trying to win an unwinnable battle.
Wow.
Which could relate a lot for some people, which I think you need to really focus on is the emotional status when trying to write a character.
I think that's important. Yeah, so it sounds like this diagram allows you to take a deeper look into what really drives the character, almost as if you were them.
Yeah, and trying to just write it down to be like, to understand who your character is for when you end up actually making whatever kind of media, movie, comic, game, book, laying out the character to really make it.
And keep it in your notes as well, because I'm sure when you're writing anything with characters, you end up with over 10 characters at least, I would think. And that gets confusing,
Yeah. Another big thing is that your characters and story probably will change. I mean, look at any concept art for nearly any game, and you see maybe 5 or 10 designs for characters, and maybe like 3 different designs for like emotional status, as just an example. Like in The Last of Us 2, a character named Abby, who I won't spoil anything, is this big muscular character who is described as having arms like an ox, when the original concept art was super skinny and super short and petite, which is kind of super drastic changes.
No,
So
you make a great point, though.
yeah, your characters will change. Don't have this idea in your head that, oh, this is what my character is going to be, because either you're going to, during process, think maybe this doesn't really fit it, or someone else that you're working on thinks, hey, maybe this is the best for the direction of story that we're going.
You're absolutely right. And things are going to change, and sometimes you have to roll with the punches, and other times you kind of need things in order beforehand, and you just have to do like a little jostle to get it just right.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Do you have any other questions for me? Since I think that was some of the last of my notes for character design.
Well, you did a great job with your notes. I think that's really awesome to take. First of all, just to take a class like this, but then to do such a great job. And thank you for sharing your notes. I think that's super awesome.
Thank you for being here. It was a great experience. I've never been on an interview.
Yeah. And I mean, if you've got a little bit more time, yeah, I've got some questions. I'd love to ask you about my own game, if you're interested.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure. So I have this game, and it's kind of a bit of a secret, to be honest, because I've been working on, as my listeners know, Retro Spaceball for over 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
And I've got some prototypes and different things that I've got going on in the background, and one of them is very early. It's like in its early stages, infancy stages of writing. So, and it's a cyberpunk game, and I'd love to talk with you about some of the ideas I have for the story. So one idea I just came up with, and this is kind of like a bit narrative design, a bit writing, but it's more marketing, I think, than anything. So this idea is to actually start another podcast, right? But do different voice acting and have a story that progresses with different, music that I would make and stuff like that to fit the story of the game that I'm working on. What do you think of that idea?
Okay, I can see it. So you would be voice acting the characters in this podcast, just like music in the background. Like I've seen like mocapping, right? Like
a little bit, like the.
Yeah.
I mean, it would just be audio, so I mean that might not be a good sell.
There would be no moving, but acting.
For people who liked it, they might really like
the game.
Yeah,
like acting out scenes from the game. What I think they should do is maybe I've seen some promotionals or demos actually do a separate story from the one in the main game, but it still ties to it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. I have this character
like
designed.
have a separate story.
Yeah, I have a character designed to work as a secondary character that actually, not to give too much away, that actually dies in the real story. So it kind of so it brings you into this character, and then it kind of it hands the character off to it hands you off to another character, but then eventually, you're working with this other character, so you still feel connected. And then it cuts you off from that character, so you actually feel the loss.
Yes, that could work extremely well, I think.
Cool. No, I'm glad you're on board with that idea. I'm not really a wonderful writer. I do enjoy writing. I don't have anything published or anything like that. But But so
fine.
Yeah. So in this universe, essentially, there's like a overwhelming like governing force. Essentially, I haven't decided.
Mega corporation.
Yeah, mega corporations and like government stuff. It's all kind of combined, and the whole world is one city essentially. So
Wow, that's
yeah, I mean that's the idea. So it's just kind of it would be like an open world adventure RPG with action RPG elements, right? And shooting. So it'd be a little bit all over the place, but very two dimensional and very low resolution graphics, like 16 by 16 sprites. So I feel like that would help.
It could work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you're you know positive about it. You know,
Another good thing to know when you're trying to create world is using your color palette to your advantage. You say you're making this cyberpunk dystopian, so colors like blue and purple and like like really light colors, but on like the darker spectrum could work.
No, I think you're right on. And then as because I'm a artist primarily, I actually studied art in college, and then I moved more towards game design after graduating.
Yeah.
So yeah, color is huge for me. And what I've actually been thinking, not to cut you off there, and what I've actually been thinking is like a lot of muted colors, but also a lot of really bright colors to kind of be like Super Nintendo era, but then also have this, like you were saying, neons and magentas and cyans of this kind of like new retro feel that's going on today, like the vaporwave type essence. So all of that would be like combining, but the pixel art would be like Game Boy, but the colors would be like a little bit more unique.
So an easy way to put this with the color palette is bleak worlds should have bleak colors. Exciting worlds should have exciting colors, and dark worlds should have dark colors.
That's interesting. I mean, I can see where that makes sense for sure, but I also feel like there would be some like gray areas.
Like what, for example?
Like Doom is a great example, right? Because it's like Doom Eternal, the newest one, it's a very abrasive and gory world, but the colors are just like crazy bright in the game. There's bright blues, bright reds, bright oranges. Every color that's in there is just extremely saturated. And there are some dark areas, but not a whole lot. It's really more based on like it actually goes back to the first Doom, which was all really bright colors.
With Doom, what it's trying to do, I'm not sure because I've personally never played a Doom game.
Oh, okay.
What I think it's trying to do is the dark colors kind of contrast the fact that it's bringing death and gore all around it to this world full of life.
No, I think you're right. I think they were going for contrast there, and I think they did a good job. Of course, they've got a whole bunch of money and art directors to throw at a project like that. So
that is true too.
They're not going to make a bad decision. Well, they might, but you know, they'll try again next year, right?
Yeah. Any other questions about your upcoming Cyberpunk game?
Yeah, sure. So another question. Well, I guess this isn't really a question, but it's like I don't know if you have advice on this. So I have 3 different kind of world ideas going on here. So there's like an IRL world, like where things happen in real time in real life, and then there's like a VR kind of like metaverse or Matrix world that you kind of
like Ready Player One.
Yes, like Oasis type thing where you have to jack into a VR type scenario, and then it'll be a 2D game, so it's really easy to just put you into another scene that looks different. And then the third world, similarly, it's just going to kind of plop you into a different world. Is going to be like a magical or spiritual world where there's some of your more fantasy tropes kind of come into play. Like magic and that type of stuff. So the idea is to then kind of merge these worlds together. Does that sound like a bad idea to you?
Not at all. As long as you do it right. I think another thing that would be interesting is with these worlds, you should definitely use different art techniques to like differentiate them.
Yeah.
Or maybe even go as far as doing different sprites, doing different styles of sprites.
That's a great idea. I think that's a really awesome idea. I should write that down.
And then for when you merge them all together, you should pick one completely or different sprite that represents all of them in one.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great addition here. Thanks for that. I very much appreciate that.
No problem. I just actually came up with that on the top of my head.
Perfect. Yeah.
And I've actually never surprisingly seen many games who've really done that. Who like pixel games or hand-drawn games that switch between different worlds and then use different art styles, like majorly different art styles.
Sure. I mean,
I've seen games with different color palettes and slightly different art styles and slightly different clothings, but never something as drastic as that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think honestly, it's one of those things that you'd have to work into the game very early on, and you couldn't really. I mean, it wouldn't be worth it to decide that late in the game because then you'd have to redraw all of this art.
Yeah,
I think redrawing art is. I mean, I've canceled games over that.
Really?
Oh yeah, if you have to redraw all of the art for a game, sometimes that's just not happening.
It's too much work.
Exactly, especially
if
there's only one
projects, and you can't do just all of that and then do like 2 other projects. Now I can see that.
Yeah, and in this particular case, it was a marketing research folly on my behalf and my partner's behalf. Neither of us did any marketing research or market research, and we were working on a game. It was actually a 2D mobile game, like a glider type game, like a platformer glider, and it was it was going to be a sugar glider. That was the character, and that was like our big epiphany. And then, after we started on, the prototype was about halfway done or so, and a lot of the art was getting done. The programmer was like, I'm pretty much done here. Like, you're going to finish that art? And I was like, looking up how the game was going to do, essentially. And none of these, and there's a whole bunch of other games that were just like what we were trying to make, that was done better, more polished, and they just weren't selling. So I wasn't ready to keep going.
It doesn't make sense if we're going to spend time on this game and then it just tremendously
right
bad.
You're cutting out there a little bit, but yeah, I was working full time, and I was spending all of my free time working on this game that just wasn't going to make any money. And it would have been cool to have something done, but it wasn't going to be worth it. And had I done that research beforehand, I probably wouldn't have signed on to do that project. I probably would have tried to change it a bit. But since we were trying to change it late into the project, the other person in the project wasn't willing to make any changes. So it was kind of dead in the water, if that makes sense.
I can see that.
Yeah. Well, anything can happen in game dev.
It definitely can. Take, again, for like the 5th time, The Last of Us, or even right now, Far Cry 6, where information has gotten leaked, which can make or break your game.
I see what you're saying.
The Last of Us, it sadly broke the game, and people are saying how it might change their perception on how gamers see companies for a very long time. Like, what are they hiding from us with their games?
Are you talking about the review bombing that happened with The Last of Us too?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
And
before then, the leaks came out in, I think, March.
I'm not sure. I didn't even know there was a leak. Is that what spurred the review bombs?
It was massive. It got leaked on Reddit and Twitter, and it was level things. It was cutscenes, gameplay. The ending was leaked.
Oh, wow.
I don't want to spoil it, but a certain character's death scene was leaked, and a lot of people are upset about that.
Wow. Well, I'm sure the listeners appreciate your eggshell walking here when you're not spoiling the game.
But it's fairly new.
Right. No, I know it's new.
Yes, it only got released a month ago, so not a lot of people have played it, and neither have you.
I have not, and it sounds like anyone who shouldn't should, by what you're saying.
It's a great game. The first one is great. The second one is good with gameplay. Definitely has some of the best gameplay I've seen ever. One of the most realistic combat I've really ever seen. And then, but it kind of falls flat on some of the story elements.
Really?
Yes, actually.
I mean, you don't have to go too much into it if you're not trying to spoil it, but I am interested, being that you're a narrative designer. There's
one certain part that I don't think should have happened. I'm not going to spoil it here, but I don't think it really should have happened. And it's probably not what a lot of people think it is. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it should have happened.
Interesting. And do you think that's just kind of inherent with being a writer, that sometimes it's just either you're going to write yourself into a position where there's no perfect outcome, or there's always going to be someone that reads it and doesn't enjoy it? You think that just goes with the territory?
That's part of being a writer, yes.
That's part of being
a writer.
There's
going to be people out there that whatever you say, they're going to go against it, like flat earthers. I mean,
okay, that's a good argument.
Yes, it is. I mean, whatever scientists say, they're going to go completely against it.
You're right. I mean, in this world today, you're always going to find an argument for anything.
I mean, even now, I'm not going to go into this too deep, but I live in the state of Georgia, where our town or our state is going into sort of a political civil war against how mask regulation should be used.
Gee.
And yeah, it's against our governor, who surprisingly is not the brightest of the bunch. He did not know nearly 3 months into the coronavirus outbreak that the virus was asymptomatic, and he wasn't wearing masks.
Yeah, no, my governor was pretty much the same.
Yes. I'm not going to go really deep into it, but like, as I said, with flat earthers and things like what's going on in my state, there's always going to be people that don't like it. But most of the time, it's going to overcrowd it. And even some of the time, like The Last of Us, it's going to be equal. And then sometimes, like Fallout 76, people are just going to massively hate it.
Okay, yeah, no, I remember that. It was kind of intense. Yeah.
There's always most of the time there's going to be the positive overshadow the negative.
So, what do you think was the bombing factor in Fallout 76?
The bombing factor. I think what happened really there was that the story wasn't as good or as interesting as Fallout 4, which was a hit. It was a hit masterpiece.
So they had set the bar pretty high, and then they didn't make it over it the next time.
They barely made it.
I got you.
They barely made it.
Do you think they did that on purpose? Maybe like they knew that they would make just enough money to maybe make another hit the next time. Kind of set the bar lower for themselves.
That Bethesda opens up with Elder Scrolls Oblivion.
Uh-huh.
I'm hoping that they set the bar, massively high with Skyrim, and I'm hoping that they might not ever reach the same level of excitement that Skyrim got. I mean, there's still players doing Let's Plays on YouTube and Twitch today that's getting millions of views. They might never reach there, but they should try.
What's the new Elder Scrolls called? I forget already. I think it's Redguard. Is it?
Oh yeah, you're right. Actually, it is Redfall.
Redfall. That's what it is. Yeah, I thought it was
but-
Redguard, but yeah, that's the race, right?
Now there is some games and sometimes where I'm hoping that this doesn't happen for Cyberpunk 2077, where CD Projekt Red made this beautifully gorgeous game that was The Witcher 3, and it was a deep story, and I'm hoping that people won't expect it for Cyberpunk, because it makes sense if Witcher 3 was massive and Witcher 4 was like the size of The Witcher 1, but it doesn't make sense to expect that for a completely different game made by someone who spent his life making tabletop RPGs and not even close to ever having the idea of making a video game.
They are very different. I mean, there's a lot of crossover as far as game design goes, especially in RPGs, but they're very different. So I could see what you're saying. And also, I'm both very excited for Elder Scrolls 6 as well as CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077. Both of those.
I sadly will not be getting it. It's my own choice due to the fact that I don't want to play a game where there's customizable genitals, which is it's a project. It's been confirmed. You've seen gameplay of it.
Huh. That's pretty weird.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of Sims like. I wouldn't say it would stop me from playing the game, but yeah, I feel like honestly, I'm not really a character customized person. Honestly, that actually not to veer off the topic here, but for me, like when I try to customize a character, I'll spend an hour. Right?
Really?
Yeah. Sometimes I don't know, like it doesn't fit me. Then I try to make it fit some other character, and I'm like, no, it doesn't fit either. Am I going to have fun playing this? I spend too much time, and it really kind of holds me back from playing the game.
I think that's why Watch Dogs is going to be so good, because there's some level of customization for like who you're going to choose, but at the same time, it's completely random.
Huh. No, I think I would like.
You could look at someone who has like blue hair and has like this leather jacket on and be like, that guy's cool. And then you can go play him.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess, and everyone's different. For me, I always kind of innately make the story for the character in my head, because I think it's because, back in the day, we didn't have stories for all the characters, and we didn't have customization for the characters. We just had to make do with the pixels that were on the screen. And they were very, subjective.
One thing that I don't like about video games, but some video game companies have been doing, is giving us a formula for a series of games and then slowly changing that formula to where, like, the most recent one of the games is not even close to the same as the first one. The one I'm referring to in this case is Assassin's Creed.
Ah, that's a great point.
If you have a formula that fans like, then you should stick with that formula. But then you have another formula that fans also like, then you could also do that, but still try to keep making the first formula that the original fans like. I mean, look at like Assassin's Creed 2 and 3, and then look at Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is more closely related to The Witcher than it is to Assassin's Creed. I mean, the company that is making it, Ubisoft, has come out and said that they're trying to make a game on the scale size of The Witcher. So they're taking inspiration from it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just don't like when companies do that. I know that I think Far Cry definitely did that, where they went from making a story-rich first-person shooter to making horrible games that the only focus, it has like a minimal campaign. The only focus is multiplayer. You can do that, but just make a multiplayer only game. You understand?
Yeah, no, people are chasing the money. They're very clearly following trends and telling people what they think they'll enjoy.
Yes.
It's frustrating. AAA is
The
terrible for
newest
that.
Assassin's Creed, I've seen the gameplay of when it was first leaked, and I was extremely excited because who doesn't want to play as a Viking? And if you see the original first leaked gameplay of them on a ship, it looks not even close to what it is.
Okay.
Now
that makes sense.
The original gameplay looked more closely related to Assassin's Creed, but the new ones look more closely related to a RPG.
Sure, like The Witcher or Skyrim or something that we've seen in ice and snow. That's funny that you may. I mean, it's very clear the way you put it, and it's just definitely funny to me. I'm not a huge Assassin's Creed person, to be honest. It always seemed like they didn't really know what they were doing. With the first one, it seemed like they kind of came up with.
They didn't.
It was like really good art style, and like the PS3 helped sell it.
The second one is where they really excelled. You might have missed out a chance on this, but due to the pandemic, you should actually start looking around. A lot of people, and if anyone's ever listening to this, anyone who loves gaming on PCs, PC, which I don't think Xbox doing anything yet, or PlayStation's still doing it. You can actually, they've been giving you free games to download that you can keep forever.
Sure, yeah, no, the Epic Store had a couple. What was it, Civ, and there was another one I can't remember. Was it Assassin's Creed? I think it was.
No, it's Watch Dogs there. Now Watch Dogs 2 is free. But the first one, Assassin's Creed 2, which I said was really where it really excelled, was also free for a while, and that's where I got really my love for it.
I did grab Assassin's Creed Unity when it was free, but this was a few months ago.
Doesn't really tell how amazing the first, the second and third game really were.
Sure, okay. And I did play the pirate one. I was living with a person who had that, and they played it all the time.
But, I mean, it could work, as I was saying, with trying to keep up with the trends. I thought that Assassin's Creed Odyssey was great. It had great graphics, great exploration, and still kept up with the formula of Assassin's Creed. But the new one is way more like an RPG and barely has really anything to do with it, with the original Assassin's Creed.
Wow.
But then again, Assassin's Creed 2 did some weird stuff. I have to admit, you got to fight the Pope.
Yeah, that is weird, yeah.
And you also had, like, this weird thing where you got to, like, make, like, 5 different versions of yourself that you got to play as.
I remember sci-fi was always, like, a hidden element in those games.
It was, and it's extremely weird. I didn't think they should use it. I think that if you're trying to introduce genre, that you should definitely keep up with that genre. Like, if you're making fantasy, then, I mean, keep it up with fantasy. I don't think they really introduced anything into it or gave us any hints about that, it's in the real world for Assassin's Creed 1 until the very end. And I think the only reason that they did it is for shock factor, and because I don't think the company was really anticipating that they were ever even going to get a second game. They had to keep it up.
Yeah, I think it was like you said, they needed the shock factor, and they weren't really they didn't really care about what they would do in the future. They would just rewrite it if they needed to. And I think what they did kept the franchise alive, but only because they have companies pumping money into it.
That is true.
So I mean, yeah, I don't know. AAA does some very strange things. It's interesting how much of a keen eye you have for it, but I guess you need to when you're a writer.
Yes, you do. You need to look at the finest details to understand how to actually make a good game. or even a good indie.
Cool. So I want to thank you a whole bunch for everything that you shared with us. And just out of curiosity, and you mentioned that you're not old enough to hire yet, but when you are, what kind of title what kind of genre or theme or style game would you like to work on? What kind of projects would you be interested in?
I am working right now on attempting to finite and remake and actually introduce a new genre of game, which is 2D open world. But it's not like Legend of Zelda. It's horizontal, like you would play like platformers.
Ah, okay. Actually, one of the previous people I had on had a similar open world 2D. It was almost Metroidvania-ish, but not quite because it wasn't really at all. I don't know. Very cool. I like the idea.
So how it would work, I'm going to explain this really quickly,
Sure.
how I think it would work, is so throughout the game, or at least how I imagine it on, is that you would be introduced to worlds. Like there's 8 different places that you would be able to go through, and at the end, you would stop at like a house, and then you would be able to open up your map and choose to go to these places. And so how this would work is it's actually not really open world. So how it works is that you would choose one of the locations to go to, and then you would get on your horse and you would start moving your horse over a fixed background. But it's custom to each place that you're going to make it seem unique, but it's more like a loading screen that you get to play.
Okay.
Before you get there. And you can also, and you get there and you explore the town. And you can't leave the town and just go. You can't just explore anything, even though you have to just go to where you can just ride your horse through fields with calming music playing in the background if you want to.
Right on. That's cool. It sounds like you're really excited for this too.
Yes, I am.
Are you just in the writing process right now, or what kind of how far along is it?
Yeah, I'm in the writing process right now. I've gotten the story idea. What it is so you start off with a character. It's in a fantasy world. You're a character who is one of the strongest beings there is, who has to hunt down people who gave them the powers in the first place to save the kingdom.
Okay.
That you live in. And so as you're killing these demons, at the end you have a skill tree, and you choose what item or what skill you want to take away from the skill tree.
I see. So like a leveling
at
system
the end of the
almost?
game, except it works in reverse.
Ah. So, okay, reverse leveling. So you're taking away. So essentially, like what you were saying with Superman, if you took away Superman's abilities one by one, the game would get more difficult as you progress. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, that's how it works. I'm trying to figure out a reason. At most games, it gets difficult as you go on, but there's never really a reason for it happening. I'm trying to give a reason for that. So at the end of the game, it flash forwards, I think, 3 months, and you're a normal person living a normal life on a farm, and you still take up offers to like slay monsters or find cattle or do mediocre jobs like that. And so that's what you're doing. You're doing mediocre jobs. It's not like some big exciting adventure. It's something as simple as like, okay, I saw this fox that was eating at my tomatoes, and you and get the fox and put it in a cage for me.
It's interesting. I can relate to it too. You know, it reminds me of living with arthritis, where
Really?
the older you get, the like doing your dishes all of a sudden is like a real chore, you know, because your joints just
Really?
don't really hold up anymore.
Must be.
You'll understand when you get older.
But yeah,
Very cool.
there we go.
I like that. And I wish you tons of luck with the project.
Yeah, I have a name for the project. The Legend of the Great One. It's going back for Norse legends and during like ancient times where they had, I don't remember the names, but it was some of the first legends of heroes and gods used in stories like myths.
Okay. So you're a huge fan of Norse mythology, then, I take.
Not really,
Okay.
but I'm going to learn it since it helps with the theme of the story.
Ah, interesting. Very cool. So we've been on for a little over an hour now, about an hour and 10 minutes. I just want to make sure that we've covered everything that you wanted to talk about, since we're getting close to the end.
Actually, yes, we have. We've covered pretty much everything.
All right. Well, since we haven't missed anything, I again want to thank you so much for sharing your awesome insight and helping me with my project. I definitely took notes.
I want to thank you for letting me on the podcast to begin with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone who's got anything they're willing to share that can help the community, of course, they're welcome on the podcast.
All right.
Well, have a great rest of your day, and thanks again. Maybe later in the future, we can have you back on, and you can talk about some projects or how far this project has gone.
All right.
Very cool. Well, have a great one. Take care. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. Thank you, Jackson, for sharing your knowledge and insight. Sorry it took so long to put it up. I can't wait to share the future interviews I have. I've got some great stuff coming out soon. Until then, everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.